Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Comedy on Power Talk, thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And it's been a few weeks since I've been back in the seat, and it feels really, really good because I've been kind of pushing pretty hard on the road, very much in a Jack Kerouacian style, sort of casting my fate to the wind and going to see my people and brothers and sisters perform on the bandstand and play music that ultimately heals me so I can take that back into my life and my community and be a more inspirational person. And as often happens on this journey, I wind up in this confluence of amazingly classic people. And it seems like a few weeks ago, I guess now, I went to go see my dear brother, Farmer Dave, and the Californiosos perform at Gold Diggers, and they were opening for this cat who I wind up connecting with, who just really blew me away insofar as just the idea of being able to come up with the concepts that he does in a way. I mean, I was able to stay for the show and was really amazed at sort of the camaraderie and conversation between him and his partner, who's doing loops and beats and different kinds of 8-track modulations. But at the end of the day, like, when you just cast your fate to the wind, when you put your heart out there, when you are vulnerable to receiving love, you wind up connecting with like-minded people. And at least from my journey over the last 11 years, I've interviewed mainly my elders, but to be able to connect with my peer group has been so enlightening. And I get a chance today to speak to somebody who's really on his own path, a rainbow and curved air. Nico Georis, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake. Very happy to be here.
Nico, it's such an honor, man. Can you just talk a little bit about growing up, how supportive your family was of not just playing music, but like being as out as possible when creating art?
Yeah. I think the first thing I'd say about that is that my dad was a musician himself, keyboard player, and most notedly was in a band called the Sandals that did Bruce Brown's Endless Summer movie soundtrack.
Whoa, really?
So he's in a bit of a cult legendary surf band as I'm growing up. And him and his brother were in the band. They're both from Belgium, immigrated over to Southern California when they were like 14, 15 years old, with their entire Belgian family. And as I was growing up, they had stopped playing music seriously with the band, but so we're always, playing around the house, and there was always keyboards and synthesizers and stuff in the basement as I was growing up. So, but that they were in the restaurant business as well, heavily. Things for them shifted out away from music and into the restaurant business, which in a way has been almost a greater influence in a strange, unexpected way. I guess I'm saying that.
No, I did. I mean, most great music. I mean, you're talking
my music.
Hey, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just saying them being in the restaurant business affected my music, almost just as much as them being in a band.
Can you go a little bit? Can you explain how? I mean, it's funny. I just picked up this book of like a cookbook from all the jazzers. Like they all put in their different recipes. I mean, did you find? Can you explain the symmetry between playing music, but then ultimately how that correlation between culinary or restaurant work and music?
Yeah, it's taken me a lot of years to put it together because I always pushed away from the family restaurant business. I was like, fuck that. I'm a musician. I got nothing to do with this. I'm not waiting tables anymore. I'm out. But Over time, I realized there are so many parallels. For one, the cooking itself, I think like a good dish really is about good ingredients and maybe three different flavors on the plate. To me, a good song also, the song itself is like a ripe tomato. If the song is not good, you could try to make a bad tomato sauce, uh, or
Yeah, I
a
did,
sauce
man.
out of bad tomatoes.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. So it's and you don't need like 1,000 different herbs. So when even uh, there's the kind of like the sauce factor, and then the textural factor. All these things play into making a recording too, where there's sounds that are crunchy or electric and have like tang, but then there's a sauce underneath, whether that's synthesizer pads or like kind of the space in the flavor. There's a lot of parallels between cooking and making food. It's also a source of nourishment for people. So I think of
Absolutely.
music less of a high art form, although it also is, but it's a form of nourishment. And that's why being a musician, whether you're famous or not, you're still cooking for people. You're still feeding people, whether you're a little mom and pop operation on the corner in a neighborhood playing music for your family, or whether you're Michael Jackson. You are nourishing people. So that's also really informed the way that I'm approaching my life in music.
I wanted you to talk. I wanted you to illuminate a little bit. I mean, your whole aesthetic is pretty off. It's pretty off the grid. I mean, I really loved seeing you perform live in that setting. I just, for the audience, there's a lot of people, a lot of my friends too, always curious about this record label, Spiritual Pajamas, and you put, Rainbow and Curved Air, Nico Georis out on that. Why did you choose that label? I'm asking because there's such a fine line between, kind of in this day and age, getting connected to a company, and there might be some kind of apparatus in place to be able to drive people to the music or get fans in the seats or
Mm-hmm.
put together a tour. But ultimately, the artists lose a lot of creative control in making their own music. And I know that that's something that is absolutely near and dear to your heart. So I kind of wanted you to talk about how you connected with Spiritual Pajamas, and if in fact you have full creative control of your art.
I do have full creative control over the art, which is paramount necessity at this point, because it's questionable what you really get from a label at times,
I mean,
but you
absolutely.
do get something, So the Spiritual Pajama guys are friends of mine that I've known because, Britt, who runs one of the two guys from Spiritual Pajamas, runs Folk Yeah
Britt Gouveia,
Presents,
yeah, dear
which
friend, good, great guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I've played shows for Britt for many years, and that's actually how this all started. I never thought A Rainbow and Curved Air by Terry Riley was an approachable piece, or it's something that you could make your own version of. It never would have occurred to me, although it was one of the most important records I ever heard as a younger person. And but Britt put on the 50th anniversary concert of Rainbow and Curved Air, so I got to see Terry Riley and his son actually perform that piece of music. Um,
Wow.
and Britt was the person who guested me to the show, even though it was sold out. And he was like, "You need to be at this show." And I went to the show, and that's how I understood the music. We spoke in person about this. That's when I heard the riffs in the stripped down setting at the core of that record, and was able to begin my journey of into the Curved Air, shall we say. So it just, when I shared that with Britt and was like, "Hey, I made this recording after I saw the show that you invited me to," he was like, "Hey man, we'd love to put this out on our label." it just felt like a no-brainer kind of cosmic circle of energy to do that with him. And actually in October, I'm going to get to perform it at the chapel, which is where I saw Terry Riley do it. So that's going to be really...
Dude, I'm going to do... Wait, hold on. What's the date on that?
That's October 9th.
You know, I'm going to try my best to... There's so much going on, but Nico Georis, man. I mean, okay, I want you to talk to not to me, but to the audience and the people listening to this, because this is not a replication of Terry Riley's Rainbow and Curved. This is your interpretation of it. And you were inspired when you saw him and his son at the chapel. And then I guess rather quickly you turned around and said, hey, I made I put this piece together. But how did you get into a space, physical, mental, spiritual space, where you were able to sort of paint on your own canvas and make this your own music? Because like last night I was in really not feeling great, and my younger daughter was kind of taking me right over the edge, and you know, I was like drinking a beer and like listening to some like rock fusion music, and it was confusing to say the least. And then I was like, wait a minute, I got to throw on Nico's record, man. I got to listen. I got to get deeper ears on this. And I put it on. I start cutting up food for dinner, and I mean, it was just silky, man. It was just, it wasn't. I don't want to say it's like Steve Halpern stuff, but there's a meditative quality to it, and that comes through. So how did you attain peace of mind to create an original representation of your own representation of a Rainbow and Curved Air?
I think part of why it worked was that it was accidental, and I didn't really overthink it. It all happened very fast.
Right.
Before I was able to analyze myself, I think if I tried to make a version of it now, I'm sure I would still do something cool, but I don't think it would be as original. I also was very naive in my understanding of of the techniques that he actually used. Some of those being mirror delay, which is a hard panned delay at a certain speed that he uses all over that production, and the tape loops. There's a lot of things that in the last 2 years, especially since I've been performing it live, that I've discovered that are quintessential to the Terry Riley version, but I didn't know about any of those techniques when I made the recording. I literally jammed the riff at home for a couple months. I was living at that time after I saw him perform it live. I was living for 2 months on a remote piece of the Sonoma coast at a buddy's cabin, and had all my keyboards set up. It was one of the most peaceful bubbles in my life where I was able to play music all day, every day, which is rare. And so it was kind of a rich time for me to fuck around with that riff. And I actually had a recording session scheduled for a different record that I was finishing in San Francisco, at Tiny Telephone Studio, this really sweet studio, which now has closed, but it was the legendary SF spot. And I finished early, and we had one more day booked in the studio, and we didn't really know what to do with it. And my good friend Matt Baldwin, also a wonderful musician, I was staying at his house, and I had shared with him that I'd been fucking around with Rainbow and Curved Air, and that I was really excited about it. And he was like, why don't you got this extra day in the studio, like what do you got to lose, man? Just go for it.
Love it.
And
I love it.
And so this is the only time I've ever really done this, but I took a couple hits of acid and in the morning for breakfast and rolled into the studio pretty freaking deep, in a deep space, and told the engineer, I was like, hey, we're gonna try this whole other thing. Can you can you figure out like a metronome in 7 and let's go for it? And they had a Prophet 5 and they had all sorts of sick keyboards. I brought all my keyboards in and we just spent all day like taping it to, 2-inch tape, and I put 4 chords in there. Terry Riley's version is all on 1 chord, but I added, sections where I went to the 4 chord. I also realized later that I was hearing the riff backwards. So instead of the 7 being made up by like a 4 then a 3, I was playing it with a 3 and then a 4. That was like backwards. Didn't know about the delay techniques. We ended up doing tape loops, not because we knew Terry had done it, but because it sounded cool, so that worked out. It was very naive.
I don't even like that word. To me, I think it's ballsy. Actually, I mean, first of all, I also want to.
Yeah.
I mean,
no.
I mean, I love that. Tell me. I mean, you had the late great Neil Casal when they were making the first circles around the. I mean, Justin Kreutzmann, Bill Kreutzmann's son, was like, "Here's some dough. You have a week. We want intermission music for the Grateful Dead 50 concerts." And Neil's like, he went home and he's like, "Dude, Justin, that's like 5 hours of music. That's a lot of music before the show, intermission, after." And he's like, "Just do the best you can." And they literally, I mean, the Cats hadn't even, without going into detail, a couple guys had never met each other before. They just went into the space, almost a raga-esque sort of mentality, cranked out this music, didn't hear it, didn't know what it was going to sound like, was just hoping it would be background music that would disappear in the big football stadium before the Dead came on. And much to their chagrin, it started to blow up. And it was because they had no time to overanalyze and overthink it. And I just want, you said it was, I mean, explain a couple things. Why, and this may be self-explanatory to you, my experiences on LSD, I'm not sure if I would be able to complete something like this, even as audacious as it was. What was the concept behind eating? Maybe it was the greatest orange sunshine in the world, but explain why you felt like that was necessary. Maybe that was like something to get you over some sort of psychological humps. I'd love you to talk about why you dosed two hits that day.
Yeah. Well, the legend has it that that's how Terry Riley did it.
Wow.
And I've also had, I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what I've always heard. And, amongst my group of friends. And, medicines are different for everybody. For me, that particular medicine is incredible. And it allows me to unlock parts of my thinking that become very adventurous, and it just felt like you said ballsy. It felt ballsy. It felt adventuresome. Like I wanted it to feel. I think when I'm making music, I like to feel like I'm on the edge of disaster or glory, and I'm taking big chances.
I love it, dude.
And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
baby. Yeah.
That. Yeah, like playing it safe, I don't think is the vibe for me. And of course, there's times when I do that, but that's when I'm least proud of myself. I really always trying to outgrow myself, think outside of my own box. That's where I really thrive. That's where like my musicality also is very alive, and it turns me on to do that. So, not that I dose every time I make a recording at all. It was just, it felt like it was really in the spirit of the 60s and the spirit of Terry Riley, Rainbow Curved Dare, and the spirit of experimental music, kind of like an homage, also recording it in San Francisco. And I had good friends. I knew I had two of my closest homies there. One of them was the engineer, and my other friend was like, I was like, "Hey, if I do this, are you going to hang out today? And I need you to keep an eye on me, make sure we're not like going too far
drifting away." Absolutely. I love this.
Yeah, will you keep this focused and hold space? And he's actually a psychedelic therapist himself, so he was the perfect, and a brilliant musician, so he was the perfect guy to hold it down that day. We didn't finish it, but I was able to take some really I took a lot. We recorded an entire reel of tape, so it was like a 30-minute jam, which ended up getting edited down to 14 minutes. And I overdubbed a lot at home, did a lot of the different tape speeds and manipulations and like much more experimental shit at home on my own time, and edited it all together. And, there you go. That's how it happened.
I mean, first of all, I have no doubt. I mean, it is a legend, but I saw recently some pictures of, it was a while ago, but Terry Riley with Terry Haggerty from the Sons of Champlin. I don't know if you knew that band or not. They were the baddest band in the Bay Area from that whole milieu of bands, the most accomplished and sophisticated group, and they dosed hard. So there's no doubt Riley was dosed as well. I just as we put a button on the curved air, so to speak, Nico, I wanted to ask you, what has been your, because I know I came out of, I walked into Gold Diggers, and next thing you know, we're outside doing an interview, and I just wonder about your experiences. Have you had good experiences playing with trap drummers, like, with a kit drum? Like that, to me, like what's interesting is that, you went in, took this leap of faith on an album that, there's rhythm to it, but there's not a rhythm section per se. When I saw you with your partner on stage, he was doing some fascinating stuff, but again, it wasn't a trap drummer. Do you have your own inner time feel, and has that been able to translate over to, just in general in musical settings, working? Have you had good relationships with kit players?
That's been the most challenging instrument to interface with in my life. And I love drum kits. Had a hard time jiving with drummers. That's been my experience.
I felt that so strong. Now explain as honestly and vulnerably as you can, like, because I just felt that. I'm like, he really has his own inner time feel, and I don't know if other human heartbeats would be able to get to that. I don't know. The floor is yours. I really would love you to talk about that. And if it's something that even, like, over time, if you feel like that's an area where I don't want to say come halfway, but you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And I don't know. To me, it's always about the musical conversation. So the floor is yours.
Yeah. That's really cool. I appreciate you tuning into that. That's a really interesting question and observation. I think I have a burning inside for what I consider to be funky. And now I'm not talking about like a funk beat. I'm talking about, it could be any type of beat from any genre, but there's an approach which is full of energy but spacious, underplayed, full of tension, kind of loose but kind of tight. It kind of has a sense of humor, but is like, pulled back in a certain way. I don't know how to describe it, but there is, and when I hear somebody play in that feel, it makes me scream. Yeah. I cannot control myself because it is so funky, and it's like it hits my funky bone, or whatever, like, and tickles me in a way. It's like, so yeah, I have a very particular sense of rhythm that is like something that I've been chasing my whole life, and that I haven't been able to convey to drummers, or maybe I haven't found somebody who shares that same idea of funkiness. And so I feel like I've just been more and more like, hey, that's okay. I'm not going to put myself in a position where the subtleties of what I consider to be funky are easily trampled at the whim of somebody who considers themselves to be more of an authority on rhythm, which, because you're a drummer, you're just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm an authority on rhythm. But not all drummers think that way. But the piano, keyboards, every instrument is a rhythm instrument. And when the funkiest recordings, look at James Brown, you can hardly hear the drum kit. It's
Absolutely,
not like a slamming.
Absolutely.
It's like the shaker. The shaker is like the whole feel. Or the guitar, the bass, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's, you don't need to get slammed by a beat for it to be funky. Actually, contrary, it's often the contrary in my book.
Well, just for the record, only because I've hipped you to, I feel very honored because obviously Nico, Georis, huge palette of music, hours of deep listening, a lot of heavy stuff, but I hipped him to Dick Hyman and Dr. Patrick Gleason so far. And so don't let me forget, I think the bottom line is about like conveying what you are feeling or what makes you scream. That'll never work. So it's a matter of just somebody coming into your existence that there's like a slow telepathy. Maybe it's not perfect at first, but slowly it grows. There's one cat, and I'll toss you his name. You can at the end. There's one guy that maybe worth looking up. So I'll hit you with that later. But the reason I ask is because like, Nico, do you like? I feel like with what I saw, in that duo configuration at Gold Diggers, like there was tension and release, and sometimes I actually like my angst or my whatever my impulse like wanted you to kind of even go funkier or whatever I think funky is, but you would hold back, and it was just like you kind of were like modulating in a very, very. I just thought it was very solid. But do you when you see this kind of music, this piece, you'll perform at the chapel, you'll probably continue to perform it. The reason I bring up the drummer thing is just because I don't care what kind of genre of music it is. It's like the percussive aspect, when done within the context of what you're trying to do, it will increase the vocabulary and the song will continue to grow. And I just wonder if that's like something that in your music, like, that you're always attaining, that you want your compositions to continually keep growing, especially, most importantly, live. I just wanted you to talk if that's something that, and it's not a conscious thing. It's not like you go up on stage and you're like, I got to push the envelope tonight, but just somehow it just continues to sonically expand. Is that something that is always sort of a front burner with you?
Yeah, definitely. I think you got to keep on the adventure sonically. It's got to evolve. But that's just for survival and for the sake of the music. And there's always new fantasies presenting themselves, when you're listening to new music, shit you haven't heard, or you see something happening and you're just like, that just happened to me. It happens to me every once in a while, and I love it when it happens, when I hear something that just makes me feel like, whoa, hold up, like this just changed everything. It stops me in my tracks. I was like, wow. And
you're frozen for a minute.
Yeah, that's super inspiring, really challenging too. But the drum thing, percussion, is something that I'm taking already more and more. Like, I'm working on new stuff that like fully has beats and stuff that I'm like actually making myself, now that I've finally accepted the fact that like I don't want to be limited by like not having drums, or be limited by having drums played by somebody that isn't playing them the way I think they should be played.
Absolutely. No, I dig, man. I love this. Yeah. Yeah.
Bringing that element in is super exciting. That's one of the new, evolutions for me, which I don't even have any recorded evidence of yet, but it's like what I'm actually working on right now. So, I'm very inspired kind of by like Lee Perry, and kind of, like dub music is a real inspiration, but not necessarily applied to reggae, but like the concepts in dub being applied to other beats.
Well, I'm curious, like when you say dub, like, is the down, like for your downbeats, would they fall in like the 1 and 3, or it's all sort of subject to change?
Just talking more about like using, this is really where my bandmate was coming in.
What's his name, by the way? Who's that cat's name? I don't want to keep saying just your partner.
Yeah, totally. He goes by TP Dutch Kiss right now.
TP Dutch Kiss, man. That dude was nasty, dude.
And yeah, he's an engineer. He's actually the guy who engineered Rainbow and Curved Air. you know, he's also a musician. He plays instruments, but his instrument is the studio, and so that's why he was the dub master, or whatever you want to call it. He was dubbing out what I was doing live. So his instrument is the mixing board. His instrument is this Octotrat kind of like granular synthesizers, like shit that's able to pick snag what I'm doing live and stuff that we've already kind of like pre-sequenced and stuff, and like run it through a modular synth, or like shoot it over to the tape loop. Then he'll actually make a tape loop that we had calculated the inches so that they would be in the exact tempo of, you know, of the song, and then doing reverb swells and delays and like all sorts of live effects, and also like filter sweeps on drum samples, and like there's just so much studio manipulation that you have brought to the stage. And that's really what I mean by dub, is actually having an element where my fingers are not the final touch before the sound comes out, but where I'm playing into not dead air, but I'm playing into an intelligent circuitry that is interacting with me and throwing what I'm playing back at me. And that's what my buddy was doing, is basically you know, it's like if you played an instrument outside and there was and the air had intelligence, or like the trees had intelligence, and they were like playing it back to you, right, and like putting reverb on it and shit, you just be like, whoa. And it changes how I play when I'm playing into an intelligent field that's manipulating my shit. Like I'm no longer in complete control, you know. So that's what's been really, really amazing, playing with that. And that's what I meant by applying dub concepts to other genres of music.
I get it. No, I love that. So how long have you been engaging with these intelligent, there's no way I can wax the way you just did, but I mean, going from isolation to, or having full control, to basically being a mirror to somebody else and they're throwing stuff back at you. How long has that been going on for you? You know, like that lack of control, I mean, that's like the most important part of, I think, any craft in life, is just actually like not pushing yourself, but surrendering to that lack of control and realizing like maybe you hit a clam, but then that clam takes you into a completely different vortex.
Yeah, that, my friend, is.
You know, what you can think about. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just gonna say that's applicable to just living life. You know, it's that lack of control. It's the vulnerability of just being alive on this planet and not knowing what's going to be happening. And I feel like if you're trying to control everything, you can do that humbly to a certain point, but if you try to really control shit, then you're missing out on the good stuff. And it's the same thing with music. I just can't, that's, at least for me, I can't follow directions. I can't even follow my own directions. I need unexpected shit to happen.
Me neither, man.
You know? And having your buddy basically be the gatekeeper / reflective device of your sound is like, yeah, it's sometimes frustrating. I'll play some shit and he like took all the low end out and put a ton of reverb, and I'm like, no, like, no, like, where's the bass, dude? Like, give me the bass back. But like, he's on a different trip, and so then I'll play some shit with no bass, and it forces me into a sector of the jam or the music that I wouldn't have picked, you know. So sometimes, yeah, for better or worse.
Well, for the record, at that show, it was very obvious that you guys, that this was not a formula trip at all, and there was some, maybe I was picking up, like there were some opportunities just feeling things out and like reacting, and like maybe there was a serve that had a lot of spin on it, and you weren't, and then you had to come back, and it was really refreshing to see that. Like it wasn't sloppy at all. It just it felt like you guys just needed about 2 weeks. You needed like a residency somewhere to sort of, lock it in where it would just take off. But, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice, and I don't expect you to know who this is, but pay attention to the content, and we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
As an instrumental group, and I was working with Donald McDonald. The core group was with Joe Beck, Donald McDonald, Warren Bernhardt, and I think Hal Gaylor was playing acoustic bass.
You're right.
I'm pretty sure. So, and we were experimenting with a lot of electronic, not only music, but like we'd tape stuff and then split it up into, 500 pieces and then put it back together, and then you'd have that just loop while we were playing. So, and I was also working with the woman who sang, turned out to be my wife a year later.
Sally
Waring.
Are you still married to her?
Sally and I, no, we did raise 4 children together.
Oh, that's great.
And Sally and I were working on some songs for her album, and so that's why she appeared on the album with a string quartet.
I guess.
And I was studying at the time. I was studying with Don Sebesky, and I think you know that name.
Oh my gosh.
Studying arranging and orchestration with Don Sebesky. So conceptually, it was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I'd like to record it and let's just see what happens. And also, I have been playing with Chuck Rainey on quite a few funk dates, so I thought it'd be interesting to have electric bass, and have him do his thing on bass, and also have an upright bass player.
Are you talking, Nico? That was that wasn't the right audio clip, but that was an interview I did with a great vibraphone player, Mike Maynari, who's still with us. He's in his 80s now. This is the quote I wanted from him, and then I'll read it to you. He said, in 1965, Donald McDonald, Warren Bernhardt began looping. They would sit, get high, and play a gig. They'd sit there for days, going through tapes of gigs that we recorded. We'd cut up these tapes. This would work with this would work with that. They turned out to be very interesting loops. While we were playing, Jeremy Steig would have a coloring sheet, and as we'd be playing, he'd be drawing. Slowly, these beautiful drawings would just appear on a silk screen. We were experimenting early on when I used pickups on the bars of my vibraphone so I could go through the wah pedals and various other fuzz tones and loops. And that was in 1965. And I'm interested in what I really was also fascinated by with your live performance was the 8mm video or film that was playing, and I just wanted you to go back to the earliest times that you can remember cutting up tape, fusing different shows together, creating loops. To me, this is not a new thing. It's popular, but it's not a new thing. And I just wanted you to harken back to when you were kind of, again, maybe naive or didn't know anything, even less than we know now, and yet it began to open up parts of your mind that either had been dormant, and it just led to where you are today. I just love that cutting room floor stuff when you don't necessarily know what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that too. I think it's something that definitely is not new and doesn't need to be new. It's kind of a quintessential energy that with whatever technology our generation or their generation or the future generation has, you can kind of cut into reality itself by recombining moments in time or by altering sound and kind of it's almost like getting to stick your hands into the gears of reality and time and space and kind of just start morphing it. It's like almost like a ritual magic process, and it feels, it's hard to speak of, honestly, but it's very life-changing and powerful. It has been for me when I've gotten into that kind of stuff, where it almost feels like it's bordering on a form of, prayer, or like witnessing the future or the past, kind of like leaking into the present, or it also like reveals stuff. I know that, a good friend of mine turned me on to William Burroughs' whole like trip on language, and how it's like a living entity that is almost like using us as its host, and that is like living and evolving into different dialects and languages, and that when he would write, he would write a bunch of stuff, and then literally like cut the page in fourths and like rearrange into like new segments, and that he spoke about how sometimes the future would leak into a sentence, or the past, like all sorts of like strange phenomena would emerge within the page once he had cut into it and rearranged it. So I think the same thing happens with sound when you're making loops and cutting into recorded audio. You are doing a magic practice in a way. It is a form of, I don't want to say prayer, but of like energetic work. It's, I don't know, it is life changing.
Do you remember like an early? Do you remember like in your like? I mean, can you recall an early time in your life when there's only two letters that separate magic and music, and sort of when that prayer, because I mean there's so much dogma in Western culture and in Western Judeo-Christian philosophy and spirituality, and there's a lot of charlatans out there. And the one thing, I mean, out of all the stuff that I took away from your show and meeting you, I could just see lifetimes in your eyes and in your constitution, like just what you were talking about, the past leaking into the present, future tense, this, that, and I mean, it's not all just like it. To me, what is your spiritual muse? And do you recall early on when you first realized, maybe you didn't realize it, but you were a conduit for information coming through you from the heavens?
Yeah, well, specifically with this kind of tape manipulation and stuff, the earliest memories I have were recording on 4-track cassettes when I was in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And just like putting the tape in on accident the wrong way and hearing what I just done played backwards, or like overdubbing over something partially and then having like two unrelated songs playing over themselves, or like playing it at half speed and or recording at one speed and playing it at another, like those were kind of my entry points into this stuff. And as far as like spiritual context or whatever, I don't know how you worded that exactly, but
it is like this, like your muse, like the muse, even if you can't follow your own directions, or maybe it takes you a minute to, the point is that there's something, I mean, everybody has their own sort of guide. I mean, I just know that like, so much, there are no coincidences in this world. I grew up relatively agnostic, and I'm, without getting into it, but I just wonder what sort of puts you into a spiritual bath. And maybe it's just music. You're awash in music. David danced in the Bible. That was the first thing, and that's fine. But I just wonder, like, in some way, so many healers or energetic healers that I talk to, not even musicians, they had, I wouldn't say traumatic experiences. Some did, but they didn't do well in monotheistic religion. So they went off in their own direction. And to take the path that you're on takes a lot of, I think the other word, you could say naive, ballsy. I'd also say fearless. and that requires faith. And I just wonder where you derive that faith from.
Yeah, I derive a faith, or rather a trust, a humility, in just through the times when you have peak moments and you really understand how unspeakable this universe we're a part of is, how big, how small, how connected, how, it's just like when you have those kind of experiences where you get out to the edge of what our human brains can fathom and experience, and you get to just feel that it's like a forced humility. It's just like and it feels so good, actually.
My God, I love this, dude. I freaking love this.
That process, and then getting into whatever I don't have any particular religion or spiritual thing, but I just dig what resonates with me, which is just being, like the being separate, but also completely together with everything, and just trusting that it's not like this whole like no pain, no gain, like you have to work hard and overcome all this shit. The further I go, the more I realize, like, actually, like the music that feels natural, that's not forced, that's not contrived, that's not like me squeezing a shit out, like it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's
I totally exactly.
It's like you open up and you let what this universe does just do its thing, like through you. It's more about getting out of the way, and to me that's like, it requires a trust, and like it's like, I don't know if this is was the only analogy that's coming to mind, so forgive me, but like don't forgive me, rather. It's like a woman who is making love, and if she doesn't feel safe, then she can't relax. And if she's not trusting the fact that she's cradled in a good energy, that like you can't really have a wonderful, free, opened up experience. And it's the same way, like if you feel like the universe is a dangerous place that is like this Darwinian, survival of the fittest, like competitive, savage jungle where everything is trying to kill each other to survive, which is kind of what we've been taught. Yep. We're living according to that idea of what it is, and so we're playing that out. But like when I started getting hip to the fact that I think that's a human trip, and that what's really going on here is a lot cooler. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot more mind-blowing. It's more magical, if you want to use that word. It's just a better, it's a good surprise, and that I could actually let go and like stop trying to be something and just let it be through me, and trust that. And so I
love it. Man, you wax it was, the analogy to the love making is absolutely spot on. And I think cracking that cosmic egg and walking away, I just know that as a patron and somebody who really desires and needs that kind of healing, the level of peace inside of me after one of those experiences that is kind of unexplainable. I'm not even playing music. It's kind of intoxicating. And yet I could also see it being kind of, it's a double-edged sword, because if you're not careful, you let stuff go into, your head or your ego, and then all of a sudden you think you're responsible for it. I just spent some time with James Gadsden, 500 gold records, and he can say whatever he wants. A lot of times the leaders would just come in and he would start some groove, and next thing you know, they were off. And his rationale and philosophy is, I give all glory to God. But to me, it's like we're just only a small but significant piece of this entire cosmic puzzle. And I think that and that's what I wanted to ask you about, just to follow up, because I know sometimes you don't have a great night on the bandstand. You you didn't suck, but you just weren't that great. And, fans, short for fanatics, will come up and be like, dude, you're amazing. You were amazing. And you weren't. But, and, you sort of have to accept that at its face. But, I wanted you to talk about a specific humbling experience in New York that you can look back on and say, I'm here today because of that, even though at the time it felt like a swift kick in the rump.
Yeah. My entire first couple of years in New York were that, in a really great way, but just everywhere I'd turn, shit was happening on such a level of musicianship. There were so many genres I just didn't even know existed. I remembered somebody being like, blah, 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 like Afrobeat or something. And I was like, yeah, of course, like, yeah, like African beats. Like, I know what that is. I know African
right.
music, but I didn't even know about Fela Kuti or like any of that, and eventually, and then that happened too, where like my roommate across the hall, friend turned out to be one of my best friends. She was from St. Louis and she was really into disco. And I remember I was just like, disco? Like, that's super lame. And then she played me, like Everybody Loves the Sunshine is like an entry point. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute.
Roy Ayers,
oh,
yeah.
shit.
Oh, man.
You were just like,
God,
oh, wow. How disco and dance culture, like filtered through these different places in Detroit, and some of it went into house music and some of it went into like Bob James smooth jazz, and like you just start getting educated on like where you are, like what and New York is such a deep culture that I was 20 years old when I moved there, and I was just like a white kid from a little town, you know what I'm saying, and like thought I was good, and yeah, sure was good, but it's just so much to learn, so much to be humbled by, so much awareness culturally, like in terms of everything, man, just as a person, as a musician. And again, the humility of just being like, just because I can play a bunch of notes fast or like I can rip a little bit, like doesn't mean shit. It's what kind of style, what kind of energy you bring in. Are you a good hang? Do you like, what are you hung up on? Like all these more like human things what it's about, So that was the big education just from New York, man. Just deep, beautiful, rich culture.
Was there any like musical situation where you would, Gadsden again, he would walk 80 blocks to sit in with the jazzers. He was a stone jazzer before he got into the studios, and they'd be like, we don't know you, man. You can't sit in. Was there any kind of like, but see, there were stories like that across the country, but ultimately, maybe, was there any type of experience where you had chops, but there was a certain musical setting or genre and you were trying to make your way in? Ultimately, maybe you were humbled on the bandstand, but, it was an inclusive like, yeah, New York is a deep, rich culture beyond what even I know. I love the way you're talking here, but it's like, it's also like, hey, man, tonight wasn't that great, but come back when you're ready. Was there anything like that musically for you?
There wasn't like a blatant example I can think of right off the top, but I think more... Actually, you know what? I got one. This is really...
I want to humanize Nico Georis because, I know people put you in godlike status. The minute our interview went on YouTube, 500 people looked at it. You're a fucking star, dude. So I want to know about... I want to know about some humble pie.
Yeah. Okay, so here's some humble pie. My friends were throwing a party at a place... called BPM, which was a warehouse in Williamsburg that was really, it's no longer there, but it was just a really hot spot at that era, and always wanted to play there. It was just the coolest spot, and finally there was a party and my band got an opening slot, and The two headlining bands were old school, fucking incredible. There's a project called Afro Japo that was like, you know, members, like old members of, you know, people who played with Alice Coltrane and the Japanese cats and like electronics with like this like insane African rhythm just like genre you've never heard, just like such New York shit, so good. And then there was this DJ Pork Chop who was a fucking legend in that scene. Just this, I don't know where he's like from the Caribbean or something, but like this homie that just fucking slayed it. Amazing DJ, so eclectic, would just like, you know, he wasn't just house or this or that, like his DJ sets would have everybody dancing, but he'd be playing all these genres. Just, I looked up to this dude. He was super wild, super intimidating. I was very young, and all these people were so cool, and I got a chance to open up, and I had this instrumental band at the time, and we played this set, and yeah, we thought it went pretty good, but definitely had that feeling of like when the other bands came on, we were just like, oh shit, like saw how everybody reacted, how the energy changed, super humbling. And then the after party was at this loft building, and we partied all night, and then in the morning we're like laying around on the floor with this DJ Pork Chop dude, and we're hanging out and we're talking about how amazing the night was, and this dude basically was like, yeah man, like blah blah blah, you know, super dope, this, that, and the other. That first band though felt like it was like some, I forget what he said, but he just clowned on us so hard right in front of me because he didn't know I was the dude from the band. He was like, yeah, I was like some sort of like cat chase cartoon, Grateful Dead, like nightmare gone like bad or some shit like that. He like said something like in front of all these people that I knew and really looked up to, like about my band right in front of me, and everybody like knew that he didn't recognize me, and it was just like this silent moment of just being super dissed by this guy. And I just was like, okay man, that hurts, that's a big blow, but I also was like, he's fucking right. It sounds like some shreddy Grateful Dead nightmare cartoon music. It was way too busy. It just did not, so I ended up growing from that comment. It was a gift, but yeah, that was a
you know, I just want to say, man, thank you for sharing that story, because so many people will keep stuff inside. They'll never share this stuff. They'll never talk about it. I mean, I think that's one of the most, I just know like my heart would kind of fall apart if I heard something like that. But at the end of the day, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And, you know, yeah, you weren't on that kind of sophisticated level as the bands after you, but I just feel like we're more and more now, it's about safety and being safe. And I mean, just having kids, like there's just a lot of like helicoptering and not wanting kids to fall down and to get hurt. And yet the only times, Nico, in my life that I've ever grown has been when I've just been through adversity. And that goes at personal, philosophical, psychic, you know, everything, man. Like, and I just, and so that in that moment, in that day, things were kind of nasty. But you know what? Yeah, you know, once you kind of got back and stewed a little bit, you're like, yeah, okay, I got to step my game up, you know, and that's what it's about. And that's really hard because a lot of cats want to pack it in. And my man, we got to do set 2, man. I got another interview right now. Can we do set 2 down the road? I mean, I just love hanging with you, man, and I got to come see you play, you know.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I love hanging with you too, Jake. I'm down. Whatever, you know, anytime.
We'll figure it out. I'll get with you after later today, and I'll, you know, but about that drummer. But you know, all I'm saying is like, I'll get off my soapbox, but it's just like there's something about those heartbeats merging that is important more than any loop or drum loop that you can ever harness. It's just like, and I don't need to tell you that. So there's one cat I have in mind. Maybe it be whimsical, but either way, man, mad props to you for what you're doing. The definition of success in my book is being singular, cutting above the morass, and doing something completely unique. If you cover those bases, then you found your purpose in life. So, Nico Georis, man, I can't wait to do it again, man. Much love to you.
Yeah, much love to you, man. Good looking out. And so, yeah, so good to meet you the other day.
Cosmic, man. It's cosmic. We're hooked for life, baby.
Yep.
I'll get this up later, and we'll be in touch, man. All right?
Okay.
All right. Be cool.
Right.
Yeah. Be cool.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace, brother.
Yeah. Peace.
Bye.
Yeah. It's great to be back in this hot seat again in Power Talk, and we will be back with Pipe Sabalos right after this.